I greet you all again. Good evening. My name is Bayo, and I'm calling in from Chennai right now. Chennai, India is where I live. My wife is Indian, so we live in Tamil Nadu most of the year, and then the other parts of the year in the United States. But I'm here with part of my family. My wife is traveling in transit right now. And I did receive this beautiful invitation, and I'm glad to be here. I was touched by it, by Cynthia's text, and more especially by the spirit behind the invitation. Just to confirm, can everyone hear me really good? Because I have this fine mic in front of me. Are we hearing? Is it good? Is it clear? Excellent. So I don't have to return it. I thought I would just you see, Cynthia, all the people you just wrote on that board are my friends and family. Tricia, Vandana, Joanna calls me her son. You know, she was on my course a while ago. Tricia as well was on my course. Vandana teaches with me in the same department in the university that I teach in the United States. It's beautiful to see a convening here. I felt called to share a few stories and concepts that I work with and that I'm known for today. You might have heard of the term post-activism, a coinage that I'm known for, and I will speak to those ideas a little bit. I will first tell a story, as is the African thing to do, and then we'll go from there. But not without also sharing a proverb. I'm writing my third book now, and it's called The Times Are Urgent, Let Us Slow Down. The times are urgent, let us slow down. And it is borrowed from the wisdom of, inspired by the wisdom of the Yoruba people, my people, which is in West Africa. Has anybody been to Nigeria before? Just raise your hands in the air and wave them like you just don't care. No one. Oh, that brother there, that brother there has been to Nigeria. Yeah, he knows what it's about. It's the Yoruba people are a fantastic group of people, not just situated in Nigeria, but across West Africa, but we're also taken across the Atlantic in the transatlantic slave trade for hundreds of years and became the dominant spiritual force across the Atlantic, right? They became the dominant spiritual force in the New World. Their nature religion, which is called Ifa, became a way for convening Africans in captivity to form new projects of revisiting the land, of listening to the waters, of gathering around archetypes. It became Candomblé, Santeria, Lukumi, Gayap culture in the Afro-Caribbean, right? So it's a beautiful spiritual people that I come from. And it is from them that I borrow this idea that the times are urgent, let us slow down. Now, let me tell you what that means to enter into this rhizome together. Just to get us started, could everyone just rub your hands real fast together like this? Like something yummy that Cynthia is making is about to land on our plates. Good, and now put it on your faces. Put it on your faces. Put the heat on your faces. Okay, so those are the virtual hugs of ancestors, of the digital, of the archetypal, of the yet to come around you, and hug yourself. I'm not sure if COVID will allow you to hug each other, but I'm just gonna say hug yourself. Let's begin. The times are urgent, let us slow down. The first time I shared this with people, I shared this in a keynote in South Africa with Germans that had invited me to speak about activism. And they were not too pleased that I said that. Most people did not understand what I meant by the times are urgent, let us slow down. I remember a dear brother of mine writing back to me and saying, Bayo, I've tried this slowing down business of yours. I try to do everything slowly, but it doesn't seem to be working. I type a memo slowly, I open the door slowly, I go to work slowly. It doesn't seem to be working or creating the magic that I expected it to create. I had to write back and say, I do not mean slowness as a function of speed, right? Slowness is not a function of speed. Slowness is a function of, let's say we call it awareness, right? Slowness is the effect of being on the crossroads. So when I say slow down, I'm not speaking about us taking a break in the midst of the pandemic, in the midst of the Anthropocene, in the midst of climate chaos. I'm not saying we do yoga more effectively. I'm not saying we go on holiday. I'm saying that we are suddenly confronted with the idea that we are not alone, right? This is deep ecofeminism as well. This is material eco-criticism. This is Karen Barad's agential realism. This is eco-psychology. The idea that we have never been alone is the most haunting, the most disturbing, the most revolutionary idea in the world right now, I would reckon. What does that mean, that we're not alone? Modernity is the fetish of isolation. It is the idea that we are individuated in a specific way, in a way that is transcendent, right? That Cynthia is separate from me. Can you hear me? Is everything okay? All right, okay. Modernity being the idea that I am separate from you and that I'm separable from you is troubled by the agency or the dispersed agency of the environment. Suddenly, we are now realizing, especially psychologists are realizing, that the human mind is not as internal as we think it is, right? That the human mind, for instance, is ecological. Psychologists speak about external minds and the external cognition, or the third brain in the guts, right? So there's a sense in which we're beginning to reckon with the idea that our bodies are actually ecological effects, that we are not predetermined, pre-relational subjects already made moving through the world. Instead, we are the function of the environment we're in, right? There was this fascinating series of studies under the banner of situationism that psychologists and thought experiments that psychologists conducted. Now, let me ask a question just to bring you guys into my digital space a little bit. If I were to ask one of you to suggest 3 attributes for a new justice of the Supreme Court in Malaysia, right? Who would that be? Or what would that be? What attributes would that be? You can choose anything in the world. Just imagine that the government has reached out to you and said, we need your advice, your consultation. What are the features or the attributes of the persons you would like to see on the highest court in your land, right? What would that be? Can I just get one from each person?
One from each person. Who wants to go?
He needs to practice the separation of powers because none of them do. Because none of them do previously.
None of doesn't do that. Okay. So such a person needs to be intelligent about the Constitution and practice the powers that you espouse. Okay, so intelligence, knowledgeability. Okay, all right.
He needs to be just.
Just.
Oh, she.
Okay.
He or she. Let me add that in.
He or she needs to be just and fair and compassionate.
Yes.
Right, thank you. That feels right. What else? Anyone else for $1,000 from Cynthia?
Equality, really. Egalitarian in some ways. Yeah,
Right.
something like that.
Right. Okay, so fair. Maybe one more.
You're hearing here the very low bar from Malaysia that people want a judge who is just, who actually knows what and cares about the Constitution, and but let's go higher, guys. What would you actually like to see? I mean, if you actually could have someone who not just meets the minimal standard, but what would you go for? I heard Neville saying something.
It's good if he is non-binary.
What else we got here?
Oh man.
I'm hoping to have someone younger, like way younger, to be in the court. Not too old. Too many retirees in the High Court.
Too many retirees in the High Court. Same problem here. I know what you mean.
Somebody intuitive and very connected with their body. So maybe somebody with a really good dance move. Dancer. Somebody who can move, you know.
That is very powerful.
Somebody with rhythm.
Getting really interesting. Thank you. Someone who has killer dance moves. Obviously. One last one to go.
I would imagine that someone to be very empathic. Just being, empathy. Someone that can show empathy.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your amazing. I mean, if Malaysia listens to you, you know what I mean. What they found, what they discovered, we don't. Science doesn't really lean heavy on the language of discovery. There's some, you might call it humility involved, but that's another topic entirely. But what they came to understand was that a judge and a judge's attributes are not internal to the judge. That a judge was more likely to be empathetic and compassionate based upon the texture of furniture around the judge. I'll say that again. The texture and the hardness of the furniture. I just knocked on my table. The texture, the hardness of the furniture around the judge had powerful tangential effects on how the judge demonstrated the gestures of compassion towards a client, or rather not a client, someone who presented before the court of law, right? If the furniture was cushiony and soft, the judge was more likely to be lenient. Think about that. They also found that if the judge had breakfast in the morning, that they were more likely to be lenient. But if not, they were more likely to be angry and to be less lenient and less compassionate. Think about that for a moment and think about the ways we attribute or create traits within persons. We could say Cynthia is friendly and Cynthia is this and Cynthia is that, or Bayo is this or Bayo is that. It seems like we think about personalities as embodied within persons. But right now, we are learning that those are effects of the environment. My son is on the autistic spectrum. We don't use that language in my family, but I'm just relaying it to you because you would be confused by the world of languages that we've convened to relate with my 4-year-old boy. When he was 2-3 years old and started exhibiting these signs of autism, getting us worried, we noticed quite early that he was always isolating himself. He would not move towards people. He avoided eye contact. He was the least sociable person around. He would go to a corner in the room and stack toys upon each other. And we started getting worried. And then we read something about the modern diet, right? How we eat food and the agency of a little critter, a microbe, a tiny thing called Lactobacillus reuteri. You might have heard of it. This creature is mostly missing from our foods today because you see, we are modern, and to be modern is to have effects on how we eat and what we eat as well, right? And so we looked for Lactobacillus reuteri, this tiny microbial creature, and we reinstalled this creature, so to speak, to use computer metaphors. We reinstalled this creature in our son's guts. Within a week, my friends, he was everyone's friend. He was reaching out. Now, I'm not speaking about miracles. I'm not speaking about some mumbo jumbo stuff. I'm speaking about how the world shapes us and how the idea that humans are independent of their environments, independent of influences around them, is falling apart, right? Lactobacillus reuteri colonized his gut along with other guttural forces, and the microbial activism in his tummy made it so, or contributed to the fact that my son hugs people when they come into our house right now, has eye contact. Now, this is not a cure. I don't speak in terms of cures. I'm speaking more in terms of how my son is showing up in the world today that reveals that we are not isolated. So when I speak about, I've spoken about epistemic situationism and the strange experiment of psychologists discovering that furniture actually has agency and has power. When I speak about slowing down, I'm speaking about occupying the crossroads. Modernity is about highways. Ecofeminism is about situating ourselves in a crossroad, no longer a highway, because a crossroad means that there are other ways and they're crisscrossing, and that we are monstrous chimeric qualities instead of already established coherent wholes moving through the world. So to slow down, and I should put it this way, using some trope from when I was a kid. In the market in Nigeria, you don't bend down and look between your legs behind you. Why don't you do that? Could anyone have a guess? Maybe you have that myth, that legend where you come from too. But is there something that you do that is similar to that? No? No? Okay. Someone wants to say something? No. Okay. Oh, okay.
Hang on a second.
Something traditional, something shocking.
Yeah, we have that also here. Don't look between your legs, especially at night, because you can see things like ghosts or something.
Oh my goodness, amazing.
We were haunted by that during our childhood, but until this day, I don't really brave enough to do that also.
You've just told my story. All right, guys. See you. Good night. Bye. No, thank you. Thank you very much. That is something anthropologically significant to me because it says something we share accidentally, maybe Nigerians and Malaysians. I mean, yes, I was told when I was a kid that you don't bend down and look back at the world beneath or between your legs because you would see ghosts, but not European-styled Hollywood ghosts, which are kind of coherent and tidy. Ghosts, people with 3 heads, multiple arms, multiple legs, dangerous, scary, chimeric creatures. And one day I tried to do it. I literally stood in a marketplace and tried to see what this thing is all about. Thankfully, my uncle was there and he slapped me upside the head and said, "Don't you dare do it." Don't you dare do it. I haven't tried ever since then. I'm traumatized by that slap more than I'm terrified of the ghosts that may show up themselves. But yes, that's the idea. The marketplace in Yoruba philosophy is a crossroad. It's a place where beings are constantly exchanging skin, constantly exchanging boundaries, crisscrossing into each other. The idea that we are already fully made and whole and separate unto ourselves is a dangerously modern idea where the fetish of the individual comes from, right? But to know that we are constantly being made and reiterated over and over again, that we are marketplace phenomena, that we are crossroads secretions, right? Invites us to slow down, invites us to listen deeply, invites us to notice that the environment, the world is wise. Wisdom is not here. Wisdom is not here. Wisdom is between, right? I often say that the soul is not inside of us. The soul is not outside of us. The soul is between us, right? If you've heard of James Hillman, he's the founder of archetypal psychology. He would speak about the psyche is not inside the mind is inside the psyche. And the psyche is the anima mundi. It is this giant, huge, boundaryless almost agency of things, which is what Yoruba people call ashe. So anytime you hear us say ashe, so to slow down in times of urgency, and in terms of urgency as well, to slow down in times of urgency is to situate our bodies, ourselves, and our activisms within a meshwork, a network, a spider's web, a cat's cradling network, a palimpsest of becomings, right? So slowing down, as I recall to that brother, is not a function of speed, because you can slow down on a highway and still be heading for the same place, right? Slowing down is about becoming fugitive. It's about becoming animal. It's about stealing away from the plantation that reproduces our bodies and finding ourselves in new ways or new dimensions of being. This is what I call post-activism, right? Does anyone know what I mean by a palimpsest? P-A-L-I-M-P-S-E-S-T. Have you ever heard the word before? Anybody here? Okay. Oh, someone knows what I'm talking about.
I've heard of it before. I just don't remember what it means right now. Sorry.
Excellent. No apologies. You get an A for not remembering. That's the kind of professor I am in class. A palimpsest is a dense layering of text upon each other. It's derived from textual studies, right? But when you squeeze, imagine having a book and then pouring oil on this old ancient book. And then the oil seeps through the pages so that all the writing and the fonts are visible at once on the one page. That's a palimpsest. It's like this meandering, cacophonous, chimeric, monstrous, fugitive, liminal embodiment of becomings, right? It is all flowing with one another. Some of the text will cancel out each other. Some of the text will embolden the other, right? But it's never a neat place. It is what Black and Black geography and Black outdoors thinking and African American thinking and Black studies would call, Black studies will call the Black outdoors, right? Or the noise, right? And my invitation, the invitation of post-activism is to inhabit the noise and to suggest that there is intelligence in the noise. Let me take a brief segue before I come back again, because I like to jump from here to there as I'm elaborating on some concepts. You might have heard of the name Herman Melville. Herman Melville. Herman Melville wrote the wonderful book about Moby Dick and the whales, and the attempt to capture that splendorous creature. He wrote another book. It's a short story, actually, called Benito Sereno, and it's about a slave ship that was marooned on an island, or broken and dilapidated, awaiting some kind of engineering. And then by and by, an American captain who is on another slave ship views this broken and run down slave ship on the shoreline and approaches it, enters it, and upbraids the captain. Basically says, because he sees that ship has its slaves making noise. They're just shouting and screaming. And so this American captain, this noble man, enters this slave ship and basically says to the captain of that slave ship, whose name is Benito Sereno, says, how dare you, why don't you put your ship in order, right? This is nonsense. This is nonsense. Put your slaves in order. They're making too much noise. They're screaming. They're shouting. Put them in order. I'm not going to ruin the story for you if you want to read it, except to say this. What that captain did not understand, and what the author of that short story wanted us to understand, was that hidden behind the noise was an orchestrated plan of the slaves to commandeer the slave ship and to sail it back to Africa, right? So what they were disguising with their noise was a feminine intelligence. They were passing codes to each other and orchestrating and performing that intelligence sharing as noise, right? That is what I mean by the crossroads, that we are suddenly in a noisy place. And the modern attempt, a patriarchal modern attempt, would be to try to press down and stifle that noise so that we can get order in the room, so that we can understand how to solution our way out of this shit, right? So that we can solve our problems. All the attempts to do that do not understand that there is a hidden intelligence buried in the soil, buried in our bodies, buried in the world around us. That is the invitation of post-activism and the palimpsest, right? That there's intelligence in deep places. Post-activism is not my way of saying contemporary activism is rubbish and we should get rid of it. And there's a new way to do activism, and that's the spiritually contemporary or spiritually fashionable way to address crisis. That's not what I'm trying to say with post-activism. Post-activism is the invitation to situate ourselves as exposed, right? That the story of social change and transformation is no longer private citizens who are doing good, righteous people who are doing the work on themselves, trying to respond to the world and change the world. That is a very naive, modern, possibly postmodern way of thinking about the crisis. Instead, we are being invited to notice ourselves as exposed. We are part of an ecology of being and becoming. And that means that change is not up to us. I'm sorry to say, transformation is not our agency. Humility is about coming down to earth. It's about listening, because we're not going to create a manifesto or a blueprint that will summarily address our problems, right? That is what a Euro-American white modernity machine is trying to endorse, is trying to get us to do. That in the midst of climate breakdowns, in the midst of the Anthropocene, I rarely use the word Anthropocene, I use the Afrocene, but I'll need 3 days to unpack that with you all. So I'm not gonna go into that now. But that the idea, of our times, the zeitgeist promotes this idea that we are individuals, and if all of us came together, if all of us did our part equally and did well, we can solve all our problems. But what that doesn't address is that we are not individuals in a room, we are creatures on a crossroads. And around us is the noise of bones deposited in the Atlantic Ocean across 400 years. Around us is the idea that microbes are also conducting their own experiments and conferences. Around us is the idea that whale shit is just as activist as humans. Around us is the idea that archetypes and gods and goddesses and errant thoughts and effective demonstrations are swimmingly inhabiting and shape-shifting us all the time. Around us is the idea, you might have heard of this person called Teresa Brennan. Teresa Brennan wrote the book, she's late, but she wrote the book, Transmission of Affect. And it's a powerful book. If you can get your hands on it, look for it. Transmission of Affect basically says, as I do these days, that we don't feel things as such. We don't feel sadness or despair or happiness or joy as such. Instead, joy and happiness and sadness and any feeling you think you can name is actually a territorial quality that enlists us in how it comes to matter. In a sense, we are learning today that even feelings that we thought were inside of us are actually volatile atmospheric qualities. And there was actually an experiment conducted in Europe where they found out that in the environment, in the atmosphere, they could detect molecules associated with feelings. We live in a crazy alien world is what I'm trying to say. And if we address or situate activism from the position of the individual responding to the world, then we are already late. So post-activism is the coming down to earth. And when I say coming down to earth, please know that we will not arrive intact. It is the reckoning with the idea that we are surrounded and we are inhabited. And everything that we do is a doing with. To think is to think with. To become is to become with, right? We are always composite and companion species. We inhabit a multi-species ecology. And to think about the world, we have to think through microbes and food and concepts and traditions and cultural leanings and archetypes and affective assemblages. We have to think through these things, which is impossible because we can't get our arms around it long enough before it slips into being something else, because the world is too promiscuous to abide faithful to our notions of it, right? So the invitation of post-activism and of our times, which is informed by ecofeminism and eco-psychology and eco-everything you can eco through your lips. The idea of post-activism is that the times are urgent and we must slow down. And sometimes the way we respond to the crisis is the crisis. The way we try to address our troubles is the trouble manifesting itself in different ways. And that is shocking and that is troubling. I could tell you stories. I was going to tell you a story, but I've changed my mind. There's stories that I would want to tell you about African struggles for independence, right? The African desires for emancipation through the 60s and the 70s. the political movements for decolonization that gave us our nation states. There are many stories around that, incredible accounts. If I were to look through all of them, one thing seems clear. In our struggles against apartheid, and like, for instance, in South Africa, Black South Africans wanted to be seen as equal to their white counterparts, for instance, Nigerians trying to push away the British. Something feels clear that when we eventually won the day, when we became victorious, and we lowered down the Union Jack, the British flag, something stunning happened. We raised our own flags. It's the war of the revolution of Jacques, the French Revolution. It got rid of the king, King Louis, but it left something. It left the throne, which was quickly occupied by Napoleon Bonaparte, right? There's something about victory that reinforces the carceral dynamics that we're trying to escape, right? My friend here in India, Manish Jain, puts it differently. He says, if we beat them at their own game, we've lost. If we beat them at their own game, we've lost. And so we need a third way, is what I'm trying to say. How many of you know that, for instance, in the United States, and I'm wrapping up, in the United States, I read recently that, let me give it some context. Donald Trump, the great Donald Trump, constantly spoke truth, right? According to some publications, he lied the most out of all the presidents in modern history. And then he comes up with a social network called Truth Social, I think, which he's running right now, and which is beginning to rival Twitter, right? Because he says he speaks the truth and he has never lied to Americans. In response to the new Trumpist republicanism that is emanating from the right wing in American politics, the left wing comes up with a disinformation board. You might have read this recently, or maybe you don't even know about it, which is great, right? I try to scan the environment in multiple fields to borrow examples for what is happening in the world today and to think through these things. But the left-wing Biden administration, in response to the alternative facts, language like alternative facts coming from the right wing, in response to that, comes up with a disinformation board, a disinformation governance board to seep through the internet, basically, I think, and to judge which is truth and which is not truth, which struck me as a repetition of what Trump was doing. It felt like the Ministry of Truth from George Orwell's 1984, and it was frightening to me, right? If you go to a library and a libidinous crowd of people come into the library, disturbing the peace of the library, and many times you tell them, shh, because the person who is meant to be doing that is not doing her job. And so you constantly do this, shh, but they're just making a noise in the library and disturbing everyone's peace. Sooner or later, you might raise your voice and say, everyone quiet. Think about the irony of that and how it reflects contemporary activism, that in trying to defeat the other, I become the other, right? And when you lean on something long enough, you take the shape of that thing, right? What I'm trying to say in many words is to reflect how the left is behaving like the right and how the right is behaving like the left. There's some molecular exchange happening. And that is reflecting the idea of post-activism, that sometimes the way we respond to crisis becomes the crisis. So what do you do when you're stuck in a cycle of responsivity? What do you do when we've been talking about climate chaos since the 1970s, and we've been doing COP1 and COP22 and COP23 and COP24 and COP26? There will be COP27 and COP58. We'll be flying across the world, speaking in conferences and talking to ourselves about how climate change is bad. And then we go home and then it repeats the following year or years. What do we do about that if we're stuck in this repeatability? We need an opening, a crack, a break. This is not something humans can do. This is what geological archetypal shifts, modern humans and the more than human world will co-produce together. It is within those cracks, and I loved it when Cynthia spoke about sitting in the cracks. It is in those disabling places, those places of failure, those places of shadow. I call failure generative incapacitation, right? It is a place where we can no longer move. We no longer know what to do, but it is surprisingly generous and abundant. In that place of disability, there's suddenly lots of things to do. Like we say in our family here, when there's nothing in our plates, there's a lot to go around, right? When we have nothing, there's a lot to go around. Suddenly, the crack is abundant and it is generous. So post-activism is the invitation to convene a politics from the cracks. This politics is not about saving the world. This politics is not about hoping for hope. This politics is about glimpsing, if only for a brief moment, a different difference, right? And it is allowing ourselves to be defeated, to be met by things that exceed us, right? It is not about blueprints of salvation. It is not about messianic breakthroughs. It is about the invitation that allows us to listen, to track the beauty of things, to open up our spacesuits and allow our skins to be virally corrupted by the so-called environmental external, and allowing ourselves in that middling place to think anew, to dream anew, to imagine differently. Because at this point in time, I am tired of solutions. I'm tired of the blueprints. I'm tired of the political ambitions that promise that in this new party, we will change things. I think we need a break. And the break is not a break of a holiday. The break is the break where the sacred enters into the ordinary and makes it new, as if for the first time.
Talk to us a little bit about hope, hopelessness, and colonialism.
Remember I said that feelings are not things that are inside of us. That's, I think, largely a naive understanding of affect, right, and cognition and human mattering. Feelings are territorial qualities. There is a sense in which hope tracks onto the territoriality of the human. What do I mean, the human? I don't mean the anthropomorphic figure that is seated on the screen, in front of you. I mean a terrain, a territory of acting that is in consonance or resonating with imperial longings for transcendence. Do you understand what I mean by that? That the human is a territory instead of just us. The human is not human individuals. The human is a way of acting and relating with the world, right? This is what Sylvia Winters, a Caribbean author, would call the man, right? The man. This is what Giorgio Agamben would call the anthropos, right? It's a machine that produces independence. And I wouldn't say it's evil or bad or good. It is just what it is. It creates the world in particular ways. And it wants to do this over and over again. It wants to preserve the flatness of the world so that human individuals can thrive in nation states. So what it does is that it represses the wilds. It advocates for civil and polite attitudes. Sometimes I laugh when I think about the English gentleman. And what sponsored the English gentleman was this virulent warrior-like decimation of landscapes that made it possible for the English gentleman to be the polite gentleman that he is, right? Beneath the gentlemanliness is a warrior like pose, if you will. But I digress. Hope seems to track onto this territory, right? It is Winston Churchill saying, never, ever, 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 ever give up. It is victory at all costs, right? And there's a sense in which we want to hope for better, about our world. We want to hope for a world for our children. I wrote my book in a spirit of hope. But there, like I said, hope can be a colonial force. It can be a way of insisting on human permanence and human exclusivity, right? It could be a way of saying that we will get it done. We will get the job done. We will sustain ourselves. And I wonder what hope excludes when it insists on being the only one in the room, right? The epic of Pandora's box. Many people do not realize that hope was also a monster when Pandora opened the box, right? And all the evil things flew out. The idea is that she peers in and there's hope left. Well, that's also a way of saying that hope was in this monstrous entity that was the box. That hope can exert restorative, conservative forces upon how we see ourselves and the world. That's why I like to couple hope with hopelessness, right? Not to think of them as apart, but a hope that is vulnerable, that has porous membranes, allows us to lean into defeat or allows us to lean into the joys of not arriving safely. My people have a very dangerous prayer. They say, may you not arrive safe. How dare you say that? May you not arrive safely? That's a bad prayer. I reject it. I reject it. That's what our people do. I reject it and they swing their hands around their heads, right? But the prayer to those who are well, to the trained ear, is not a prayer for demise. It's not a prayer for accidents. When they say, may your road be rough, it's an invitation for us to notice that sometimes arriving safely defeats the purpose of the journey in the first place. If journeys are not to shape-shift our bodies, if journeys preserve the microcosm traveling from point A to point B, that could be more dangerous than being marauded on the highway. So sometimes we need our roads to be rough so that we can be open to other realities, right? Be open to other energies and intelligences and agencies. So coloniality is, in a sense, this terrain of hope. It was hope that took Jesus of Lubeck. Has anyone heard of Jesus of Lubeck? Jesus of Lubeck is said to be the first slave ship. That's the name of the first slave ship, Jesus of Lubeck. It was hope that carried Jesus of Lubeck from England from Her Majesty's courtyards to Africa, right? It was hope that took those first slaves on board Jesus of Lubeck and insisted that they pray every morning as they ventured into the plantation. It was hope, or it is hope, that insists that we will have our way. So hope is political. We want an eco-feminist kind of hope, a humble, mycelial, rhizomatic, compost kind of hope, a composting of hope that allows hope to exist alongside its estranged other, right? And that is the hope that recognizes that sometimes we need to meet ourselves at the end of things, because it is only there that new ways of seeing the world might happen to us, right? So maybe I'll end that way with that question about hope, hopelessness in the colonial.
I want to ask you, do you, with your principles of this post-activism, is it similar, would you say, is it similar to the process of thinking not outside the box, but thinking in a different box, or exponential kind of thinking? I don't know.
I will tell you why I'm laughing in a bit. I'll tell you why I'm laughing in a bit. But please, go ahead. Is that the question? Is that the question?
Yeah, I'm asking
Okay.
you whether that's kind of the similar way of how we should be thinking.
Right. Okay. So I'm in Rwanda. I'm in Rwanda, not Kenya. Rwanda. This is before the pandemic landed or descended through the clouds like an extraterrestrial civilization. And I'm speaking, I was invited by this Africa summit. The Prime Minister of Rwanda, the president, I sent word, I think the Prime Minister was present. And these dignitaries speaking about the future of Africa, right? And youth and all those vaunted categories that are becoming quite vacuous and meaningless. And so I was invited to take the stage in the final moments. You know, people like to invite me in final moments. I'll check that out. So I was invited to take the stage in the closing and to say a word. And I spoke about boxes and that age-old aphorism, right? To think outside the box. Because throughout the summit, everyone had been exhorted to think outside the box. Let's think outside the box, applause. Let's think outside the box, applause. Let's think outside the box, applause. Everyone was waxing glorious with the idea of thinking outside the box. And I got up on stage and I said, well, thinking outside the box is exactly how boxes think. So, I don't know if they like that. Right. There's this, and the reason I said that is there's this notion of thinking outside the box, the invitation to outwit ourselves, to defeat our own, to kind of transcend ourselves. That feels like a reinscription of the human as an escapist fantasy, that we can just jump outside of our conditioning and address our situation. Think outside the box. It doesn't address the fact that we are stitched, we're fabricated and, immersed in the environment, that we can't jump outside of ourselves as if we were independent, to start thinking, occupying some transcendent cloudy place above the material realm and think outside the box. So I spoke about the decolonial, not as an attempt to think outside the box, but as a contesting of the claims of the box to be exclusively singular. I'll break that down. The decolonial is an invitation to see that things are not quite stable, right? That things are not as stable as we think they are. They have a proverb here in India: name the color, blind the eye. Name the color, blind the eye. That the moment of the colonial might be represented by the moment we name things, as if in a final way. This is blue, this is orange, this is yellow. It works, it's useful. But the decolonial is the notion, or is the invitation to notice that there are other hues and chromatic sensibilities that are hidden behind the name, right? That blue isn't just blue. Blue is connected with politics. Blue is connected with the food I just ate. Blue is lots of things, that the name doesn't quite capture it. Identity is a colonial trope, right? So the decolonial is a way of touching the box again and noticing that the box is not as enclosed as it is not as finished as it is. That even capture even colonial capture is not complete. Let me tell you about one box that one trickster figure from my land was able to demonstrate as being open when the colonial masters insisted that it was closed. This box was a slave ship. It came to Africa, the Bight of Benin, taking slaves here and there, transporting them. Do you know what my people say about a trickster god? His name is Eshu. He, she, it, whatever. He doesn't mind. He's non-binary, if you will, floating through concepts. British missionaries came and named him the devil, right? Named him the devil. And there's a political movement in Nigeria right now saying Eshu is not the devil. But I think Eshu wouldn't mind. He'll be like, yeah, let's explore that. Let's see what that is all about. Experimenting with reality, right? Our elders say that those slave ships, Eshu stole into those slave ships. You know what I mean? That in the dead of night, Eshu traveled with the slaves across the Atlantic, right? So that in a very, very exhilarating, emancipatory sense, when the colonial masters closed their accounting books and said, we have 76 souls on board, there was a 77th. Do you understand me? There was a 77th person on that slave ship that traveled with the slave ships and became hip hop in New York, in the Bronx, and became candomblé, the martial arts, and became Santeria, and became all the trickster fugitive technologies that became the Caribbean spirituality we speak about today. Could not have happened without this trickster stealing on board, right? So Eshu made a slave ship a womb. It made it an amniotic sac with which to travel across the ocean. It disappointed coloniality's claim that things are only things, right? It made that ship, that box, something else. This is why I think that thinking outside the box reinscribes the master's imperative, because it tells us that let's get to other things. The grass is greener on the other side. No, the ordinary is already extraordinary. The ordinary is already sacred. And the invitation of post-activism is, how do we embody and situate ourselves in the ordinary? How do we move through furniture so that we can glimpse new realities, new aesthetics, new politics, instead of trying to create this vast utopian world on the other side of the fence? How do we notice the spirituality of the moment now without trying to save the world? And that is what I would say, was not heard at that Rwandan African summit, because they also applauded me when I said, at least many applauded me when I said that thinking outside the box is exactly how boxes think. And they applauded me. I wondered about that, but I didn't wonder for long, because when I got back to my seat, the MC got up on stage and said, let's just applaud our speaker for saying that. He's telling us to think outside the box. And I was literally doing this because I was on the front row. I was saying, no, I did not say that. I did not say that, but no, it had already escaped. So yes, for those of you who can hear, the invitation is not to transcend our situation, which seems to be embedded in our activisms today. The situation is to dig deeper. It's a politics of descending. It's what the Greeks called a catabasis, going into the ground to become different, a compost activism.
Hi, Bayo. I'm Sumitra Enfo. Hi. I was curious about two things. So one, you talked about COVID coming in and disrupting the way things worked. What did you see that gives you hope of things shifting or things changing from that? And that question about what gives you hope is my second question. Like, what gives you hope now when you look at how our world is going?
Thank you, sister. When the pandemic hit for the first time, I was in Seattle. I was traveling through Brazil and then arrived in Seattle for a talk. And then I think I heard it on the news on the way to the airport that the first person had died as a result of the COVID situation. This is February or March 2020. And I was so fascinated by this creature because suddenly the whole atmosphere changed and it seemed like the world was witnessing this. I might call it an extraterrestrial visitation, like something had entered into the fabric of our space-time coordinate. And I wrote an essay. I was going to write a 5,000 word essay about this. It became a 20,000 word essay because I was possessed by something. And I called it I Coronavirus Mother Monster Activist. It's available on my website. It's a mini book because some artists came together and an artist came and created paintings for it, beautiful digital art to splice the pages. So it's beautiful that way. I guess my point is this, that when I got home to India, in the news, a man from Kerala started to do something in response to the crisis. He built a temple and called it the Temple to the Corona Goddess. People didn't like it. People didn't like it. You know, the scientists didn't like it at all. Some politicians didn't like it. They felt this is primitive. This is taking us back to the primitive times. We should be speaking about vaccines, not encouraging people to worship a virus. But the man responded this way. He said, I've always been told that God is everywhere. Maybe God is this breakthrough. Maybe God is this interruption. And it is that sense of interruption that is at the heart of my critical examination of this pandemic time, of these pandemic moments. Because we do need breaks, as gruesome as they often become. We need openings with which to see ourselves as if for the first time. We unschool our children, Sumi. We don't send them to school. We've never sent them to school. My daughter is 8, my son is 4. My wife and I, when we got married, we said we're going to embark on a different experiment of unschooling. We sometimes call it unschooling, just following our kids as if they were philosophers, instead of trying to school them in our family way. Because I think the new generation coming after us, they need to be sensuously alive to their world and not just be trained into disciplines, right? But there was no support for us, even within our own families. People didn't exactly celebrate our decision. But when the pandemic happened, 2 dailies, newspapers, journalists from India found their way to our home and interviewed my wife, basically asking, what do you do with children? The way they described it was like, children were these strange, monstrous things that parents no longer know what to do with, right? Because suddenly they're supposed to be at school, but they're at home. What do we do with them? So they came and basically said, what do you do with, children? How do you keep them productive? How do you keep them, moving? And my wife responded, you know what I think of about every day is how to reduce the productivity of my children, not how to increase it, right? But the point here is that suddenly the question became available. That's what the question became permissible. No one was thinking about that not many people were thinking about unschooling or the productivity of unschooled children in that way before. But suddenly, the dynamics of the pandemic and the shutdown and quarantine made it possible for people to ask new questions that are still ongoing today. For instance, the utility of the workplace. What's that firm again? Airbnb. I heard the CEO of Airbnb recently say, no more workplace. People can work from their homes. We can gather sometimes, but the work is now at home. I'm not saying that's a good thing, because there is a sense in which the office is now encroached upon our living rooms. And now our living rooms are now office places. But my difference, now we're asking you, there's a thing resigning from their jobs, right? They're resigning from their workplaces. They're not seeking higher salaries. People are just resigning. So something is happening in the world today because of the agency of this critter. Remember that when it first came into our consciousness, planes no longer flew in the skies. And scientists reported that for the first time in a generation, carbon emissions actually dipped. Now think about all human beings have been doing as activists for decades. We've been COP27, COP28, COP29, and nothing changed. And this tiny virus comes into the fabric and just sends everybody home. That is what I mean by we are not the only ones in the room. The world is also intelligent and agential. So I asked a question in my essay that what if this virus, controversial question, but what if this virus is what we have been praying for and we do not know it? What if this is what we've been longing for, but we do not recognize it? Right? So I guess that's my way of responding to that question, that there is a sense in which the pandemic is like a line of flight away from the circle of convergence, like a disruption of continuity, asking new questions about us, demanding new responsivities from us. And it is in that same sense that hopelessness comes into being, because I think the pandemic is here to stay. I think we have to live with it. Or people might say, oh, Bayo is saying we should not get vaccinated. Nah, that's too boring a conversation for me to have. It's not about vaccinations to me. It's about the fact that even if we achieved 100% vaccination, we are still going to be in a pandemic because the conditions of the pandemic will continually be reproduced. What led to the pandemic? Encroachment of ecologies, breaking through the ecosystems of different species, and then disturbing the viral assemblages around us, and they spilling their secretions into our bodies. That's how the pandemic manifested itself. Have we stopped? No. No, we haven't stopped. We're still going to dig. We're still going to create large parking lots. We're still going to build large skyscrapers. That's the pandemic. The pandemic will manifest itself in one way or the other. So it is, maybe I'll end with this. When we come to a place where we say, I give up, I think something shows itself. When we say, I don't know what to do, or we don't know what to do, we really are stuck here, I think something else becomes available that is not available when we perform ourselves as the messiahs in waiting. Something becomes available when we no longer know what to do. Or to repeat Wendell Berry, it is the impeded stream that sings. When we come to a place of obstacles, that is when the song becomes clearer. Hopelessness.
Hi, Bayo. Hi, Bayo. I'm Ken Bayo. Very nice to meet you. I'm a transplant here, as you can see, but but actually born in Malawi.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Really?
So I have spent time in Nigeria. So here's my question. Tell us some stories about post-activists. You know, as we absorb what you're saying, what can we expect to find on our journeys as post-activists?
I smile because, you know, this is not the first time I'm encountering that invitation to tell the story of post-activists. And I smile because I'm hesitant to make it a new identity, if you understand what I'm saying, brother. Like there is a sense in which we rush into new IDs. Like, oh, we're no longer activists, we're now post-activists, right? I'm very wary about that. I haven't come to a point in my theory-making work where I'm ready to concede that that it's an identity to claim. Instead, I think of it as the upsetting of identity, instead of us as a new identity, right? If you understand what I mean, I think of it as the between space where identity becomes queered, disturbed, haunted by that which it cannot own, right? So it's not that we have suddenly become post-activists, it's that we are post-activism in its ongoing materialization. There's a subtle difference. So I can tell stories of post-activism looking over time, where we now recognize that we have never been alone and that we have always acted with the world, right? We've always acted in, with the world, right? We've never acted independently. Bruno Latour, the French philosopher, wrote a book called We Have Never Been Modern, right? We have never been modern. In the same sense, we've never been human in a final way. We've been subsidized by this flat modern arrangement, by modern subjectivity, to suggest that we are humans responding to the world and it is up to us to save the day. But post-activism reconvenes time and history in a new way, so that we're now noticing all the contributions of things around us in how things come to matter. So I would tell you post-activism stories or quips here and there, or tropes that I'm working with. I'm doing, my work is to convene communities to explore post-activism and to theorize it, because I do not depend on my head, to understand what this thing is. I'm thinking of my work is to convene this planetary fugitive study of what it's about. And it's exciting what is happening. I often ask people about slavery, for instance. And I think one of the most identifiable tropes about slavery is that evil people did bad things to otherwise innocent bodies. It's there. It's the moral architecture of the narratives we tell about slavery. Evil white men stole Black women and men and children and took them across the Atlantic. But that story, and this is something I'd like you to keep in mind, maybe to even write down, that once we begin our analysis of a problem from humans and what humans are doing, we are already late. This is Karen Barad, a mentor and a friend of mine. She's a feminist icon and the writer of the book, Meeting the Universe Halfway, right? What is often left out in accounts of the transatlantic slave trade is the influence of sugar. Did you hear what I said? Sugar, right? The agency of sugar, the gastronomic influences of sugar. We leave that out because we don't think about the so-called natural world as a political agent, as part of a political constituency. We think about sociality as limited to humans and their interactions. But I am desirous of exploring how sugar and its stickiness and its sticky ontologies trapped our tastes and led and motivated and instigated these journeys across the Atlantic to steal bodies. In other words, if I were to create a picture of the transatlantic slave trade, it wouldn't be evil people against good people. It would be humans and sugar and technologies and oceans and spirits and tricksters in an assemblage that is ongoing. That is post-activism. It is post-humanist, right? I told a story about donuts some time ago. How many of you love donuts? Raise up your hand. If you don't raise up your hand, I know you're lying, because everyone loves donuts, right? Donuts, yes, we all love donuts. Do you know that donuts are connected to the loss of tigers in Indonesia? I see my dear auntie behind with the crown of leaves on her head, shaking her head vigorously. Donuts are connected to the loss of tigers and the decimation of ecosystems, and even the loss of species, baboons in Indonesia, in some parts of Asia, especially in Asia. I wouldn't go as far as saying Africa, in Asia. How is this the case? Donuts need oil to be fried. And oil is a massive industrial complex that depends on the decimation of trees across Asia. I cannot remember the names of these giant billion-dollar agencies, but they're dependent on the removal of trees, of palm trees, and entire ecosystems to fund our desire for donuts. I pointed this out on a Facebook post some time ago, and my most righteous friends said, yeah, we're still gonna eat donuts anyway. So it's like, yes, we acknowledge that, we're fighting for peace and all of that, but we're still going for a donut. I'm thinking about how we are caught up in principalities and powers, right? And how we're stuck in ways of behaving that we sometimes reduce to what we're doing wrong, but it's actually the agency of things around us, sugar, oil, trapping us in its assemblage, in its imagination, right? That is post-activism. Post-activism is also Huitlacoche. Have you heard of Huitlacoche? Has anyone heard of the delicacy Huitlacoche? It's a fungal pathogen. Oh, brother, it's a fungal pathogen, a disease that infects corn. And it's mostly found in Mexico. Now, instead of killing these infected items of corn, somehow the people were able to live with the disease and it became a delicacy, right? It became Huitlacoche. The disease became a meal. It is a fascinating story that I'm still exploring. Huitlacoche became a delicacy. A disease became eaten up. So they no longer try to get rid of the disease. The disease is now eaten, a point of celebration. That is what an Ohio Cancer Research Center discovered when it found out that the flu, the common flu, is suddenly actually very active and agentially potent in curing cancer. Did you hear that? A disease is potentially a cure for another disease. This is what I was speaking about boxes a while ago, that things are not as neat and tidy as we think they are. They are constantly in relationship and moving and flowing. Post-activism then is all the stories you can come up with that tell the narrative or the story of how we are or the world we live in is the contribution of things around us, not just humans acting upon humans, right? It is what people are doing, today that I can recall. I think I have some stories in mind. Lots of stories come out during my course, We Will Dance with Mountains, which is a post-activism course. Thousands of people come, or 1,000+ people came in the last iteration that ended in December. And post-activist stories about responding to trauma, responding to pain, responding to the disease of modern civilization came up that I cannot recall right now, but it's about not meeting the enemy in the energy of the enemy. Because if you do that, you get lost in the trap of the enemy, right? Even racial justice often is conceived as maybe, for instance, Black people against white people. Post-activism is remembering or recollecting that whiteness is more than white bodies. Whiteness is a territorial quality that enlists and recruits both white identified bodies and Black bodies and brown bodies and bodies of different kinds in how it comes to matter. Whiteness is not white people. Whiteness is a world terraforming building principle, right? So even Black bodies can be as white as ever. Nigeria is the largest conglomeration of Black people on the planet, second to Wakanda. Did you get the joke? Nobody got the joke? Okay, you've watched Black Panther. I see, you're cool people. I thought that joke would go over your heads. Yes, Nigeria is the largest conglomeration of Black bodies, 200 million Black people in one place, and we are as white as ever. Why do I say so? Our aspirations are white. Our societal assemblages are white. We think in terms of how do we become like London? Oh my goodness, we're way behind in our educational. We need to tailor our curriculum in terms of beating New York or beating London. You see, we're trapped in a white assemblage. Whiteness has little to do with skin. In fact, racialization is beneath our bodies, our skins right now. With how we use Facebook, right? It is the computational capitalism that enlists us to, right? The plantation is using us in different ways. So post-activism is this invitation to really be on our feet with thinking and to think along with things around us, because only then might we be able to see differently. That was a keynote in itself, forgive me, but there's a lot to say there.
Okay, so I wonder in a final few words, if you could weave together a closing, Joanna and Trisha and Vandana and Bayo. I don't know if you know Alistair's work, in the spirit of cracks and hopelessness and all of us here in Borneo. Would you be willing to do that? And maybe there's a djembe behind you if you want to, I don't know, do some rap for us. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah, I can rap.
Just some final closing words, I think, in weaving these voices together.
Yes. I love Trisha because of her rest is revolutionary idea. I think something about that just upsets the incessant capitalist production of cells that we're used to. It's like, I refuse to give my body to the constancy of this oppressive, plantation-like state. And Joanna, speaks about, even beyond the council of all beings, speaks about the heart, the world as, and I just endorsed the 30th anniversary of her book, and world as lover. She writes about the world in terms that is romantic, not escapist, but romantic, inviting us into relations of beauty, relations of intimacy, with a world that we would rather save and condone and order into place. And Vandana is just this badass speaker of the impossible, this powerful articulator of resistance. When I think when I think through these three voices and maybe these moments of closure, I feel inspired to say that in order to find your way, in order to find our way, this is what a Yoruba shaman told me many years ago when I was conducting a PhD and trying to understand healing and well-being and psychological disturbances from a Yoruba perspective. He said to me, after making fun of me and my pills, he said, in order to find your way, you must become lost. In order to find your way, you must become lost. Right? Generously lost. You must lose your way away from the highway. A fugitive Harriet Tubman-esque, vocation to flow away from continuity. And I like that getting lost is about rest. I like that getting lost is about performing intimacy with strange new qualities. World as lover, world as self. I like that getting lost is about speaking to impossible things. Maybe not speaking truth to power, because sometimes speaking truth to power can only reinforce the trope of subjects, right? So one does not speak truth to power. This is Fred Moulton. But getting lost is an invitation to find ourselves in new ways, is to occupy places of disability, which is not a bad word, which is a place of stunning new possibilities for reconvening our bodies. Getting lost is about listening and inhabiting the promise of new tomorrows and new pasts. Getting lost is about prophetic imagination, right? Which is not predicting what might come, but is about looking again at the ordinary. So I want to end with that. Whatever it might do to your bones, to your ears, to your bodies, to your hands, I say again that in order to find our way through this, we must get lost. So my prayer is the prayer of the dangerous elder for you, that may your road be rough so you can get lost. And may in getting lost, may you be disturbed, and may the disturbance be our sanctuary together. That's it.